Thank you for listening. This course was created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional podcasts, books, newsletters, and cool merchandise await. Let's get started. Edge AI refers to deploying and running machine learning models directly on local devices, smartphones, sensors, industrial controllers, or dedicated edge servers, rather than relying exclusively on centralized cloud infrastructure. This architectural choice reduces round-trip latency, preserves bandwidth, and can protect privacy by keeping sensitive raw inputs on device. It is particularly valuable for real-time control loops, on-site inference in regulated environments, and intermittent connectivity scenarios. Adoption grows because processors are cheaper and inference libraries are more efficient, enabling capabilities that were once cloud-only to move closer to sensors and users. But the shift also relocates responsibility. Devices sit in diverse physical network and administrative contexts that your program must account for. When designing for Edge, treat the device as an operational unit with lifecycle, telemetry, and update story one, whose security posture must be managed as deliberately as any server cluster rather than assumed by proximity or simplicity. Devices bring distinct and multidimensional security risks that require both technical and operational controls to manage effectively. Physical access compromise is the simplest vector. An attacker with a device in hand can attempt boot attacks, debug interfaces, or extract storage if protections are absent. Malware on endpoints may hijack model execution or exfiltrate data, and insecure local storage of models, prompts, and logs magnifies the impact of device theft. Weak patching practices and user-driven update behaviors leave long tails of vulnerable versions in the field, increasing overall exposure. Supply chain risks and tamper during transit or installation can introduce compromised firmware or hardware implants. Mitigations must therefore blend tamper-evident packaging, secure boot chains, mobile device management (MDM) controls, endpoint detection, and strict cryptographic protections so that device compromise is difficult, visible, and contained rather than a silent loss of critical capabilities or data. Models deployed on edge devices change the calculus of intellectual property and operational security because model artifacts travel with hardware and face unique threats. Theft of model weights or checkpoints can enable cloning, unauthorized redistribution, and reverse engineering of proprietary behavior, while tampering with checkpoint files can inject backdoors or degrade safety controls. Adversarial manipulation of inputs at the physical layer, small stickers on a traffic sign or audio played in a control room, can reliably cause misclassification or dangerous behavior if models are not robust. Local extraction techniques, including API probing or side-channel analysis, can reveal sensitive knowledge encoded in models, such as memorized training data that violates privacy promises. Defense in depth for models on the edge includes encrypted model blobs, hardware-backed key protection, trusted platform modules or secure enclaves, signed and attested model updates, runtime integrity checks, and watermarking or fingerprinting to detect theft or unauthorized distribution. Data risks at the edge often follow from convenience. Storing telemetry, prompts, outputs, and intermediate artifacts on local flash or logs makes investigation easier, but increases exposure if devices are lost or compromised. Unencrypted local records of user prompts, captured media, or inference outputs risk leakage of personal data, proprietary context, or trade secrets. Insecure local logging and backups can replicate sensitive content to removable storage or cloud sync services unexpectedly, and naive retention settings create large attack surfaces over time. The re-identification risk intensifies when local data includes metadata timestamps, location, device identifiers that, when combined with other signals, can reconstruct identities or activity patterns. Practical protections include encryption at rest with keys bound to hardware, ephemeral buffer strategies that avoid persistent storage of raw inputs, strict access controls on logs, client-side redaction or anonymization before any retention, and clear lifecycle policies that ensure data deletion is provable and auditable. Network-level risks are amplified at the edge because devices commonly connect over untrusted networks, use consumer-grade Wi-Fi, or rely on intermittent links that complicate mutual authentication. Insecure Wi-Fi and weak TLS configurations invite man-in-the-middle attacks that can tamper with telemetry, hijack update channels, or intercept sensitive model queries. Lack of certificate validation or acceptance of self-signed certs in constrained clients creates easy impersonation opportunities. Over-the-air update pathways are attractive targets. An unauthenticated or unsigned update can inject malicious firmware or swapped models. Defenses include strict transport layer security with certificate pinning or mutual TLS, robust key management, VPN or authenticated tunnels for management traffic, network segmentation that isolates device control planes from user data planes, and out-of-band verification channels. Architect networks and update flows so that compromise of a single access point does not cascade into fleet-wide failure. Patch management on distributed devices is one of the thorniest operational challenges because scale, diversity, and user behavior conspire to create a long tail of unpatched systems that adversaries can exploit. Devices may be offline for long periods, operate across time zones with limited maintenance windows, or depend on end users to accept updates factors that lead to inconsistent version control and delayed security fixes. Older hardware constraints can prevent modern cryptographic patches or rollbacks, and firmware updates may require coordinated staging across many device classes. Effective patch programs combine automated, signed over-the-air rollouts with phased canary deployments, telemetry-driven prioritization of high-risk nodes, enforced minimum versions for critical services, and emergency patch channels that can reach even intermittently connected devices. Additionally, maintainability is improved by designing for replaceability short software stacks, modular firmware components, and clear deprecation policies, so the operational burden of patching remains tractable rather than catastrophic. Hardware security is the bedrock that keeps edge devices trustworthy, because physical access changes the threat model in fundamental ways and requires protections that go beyond software controls. Begin with secure boot chains and firmware signing, so devices only run authenticated images, and couple that with hardware-backed key storage trusted platform modules or secure enclaves that isolate secrets from the main operating environment. Anti-tamper measures like sealed enclosures, tamper-evident labels, and detection sensors raise the bar for physical extraction and provide signals for automated quarantine. Supply chain controls matter too. Provenance for components, vetted suppliers, and attestation flows that verify a device's identity at first boot reduce the chance of pre-installed implants. Complement device-side controls with attestation protocols so remote services can require proof of integrity before accepting telemetry or granting elevated capabilities. Finally, design for graceful failure. If attestation fails, the device should default to a minimal, safe mode rather than continuing to serve high-risk functions. Identity and access controls for edge deployments must be precise, minimal, and dynamic because coarse credentials or long-lived keys invite exploitation across hundreds or thousands of endpoints. Implement per-device authentication tied to hardware-backed keys and rotate credentials automatically on a short schedule, favoring mutual TLS or certificate-based authentication over static API keys. Per-user separation is critical when multiple people interact with a single device. Enforce role-based or attribute-based access controls so local actions map to auditable identities and scopes. Scoping of permissions follows the principle of least privilege. Devices should present narrow capabilities to services, and operator accounts should require just-in-time elevation and multi-party approval for high-impact operations. Credential management should integrate with centralized identity providers and support emergency revocation and rapid reprovisioning. Also, bake logging and policy checks into the access path so every authorization decision is recorded, correlated, and reviewable for both security and compliance purposes. Monitoring edge devices requires a balance between local detection sensitivity and centralized visibility, so you can spot and respond to anomalies without overwhelming analysts. Start by collecting structured telemetry at the edge, process integrity checks, model hashes, inference rates, network flows, and security posture metrics, and transmit them with verifiable metadata about decoder versions, attestation state, and firmware timestamps. Use lightweight anomaly detection at the device to catch obvious compromises locally and to trigger immediate safe defaults. Escalate richer context to the Central Society for correlation with identity, network, and vendor signals. Design telemetry pipelines to tolerate intermittent connectivity while preserving tamper-evident logs for later forensics. Durable, encrypted buffers and signed records are essential. Integrate alerts into existing incident management so escalation paths and runbooks are consistent with enterprise processes. And maintain retention policies that support regulatory needs and investigative timelines. Monitoring is not only about detection, it is about creating reproducible evidence that investigators can trust. Scalability is the operational challenge of moving from tens to tens of thousands of edge devices without losing consistency or control. Manage fleets through a centralized registry that tracks device identity, firmware and model versions, location metadata and operational state, and bind orchestration tools to that registry for targeted rollouts and emergency revocations. Ensure update systems support staged deployments, health checks, and automatic rollback to known good checkpoints, since simultaneous failures across many devices are catastrophic. Network bandwidth limits require strategies such as delta updates, peer-assisted distribution, and prioritized scheduling to avoid saturating constrained links. Resource allocation should include capacity planning for telemetry ingestion, storage of raw inputs for forensics, and compute for local detection. Invest in tiered architectures where edge nodes perform trimming and compression before sending evidence upstream. Finally, automate as much as possible policy as code for device configuration, CI/CD for model artifacts, and policy-driven enforcement so scale does not multiply manual toil or error. Compliance at the edge demands that technical choices map transparently to legal and sectoral obligations, because regulators and auditors expect the same evidence and controls whether data lives in a cloud region or a handheld device. Identify applicable mandates, early data residency, healthcare or financial protections, audit trails, and breach notification timelines, and encode them into device policies, where raw inputs may be stored, how long telemetry must be retained, and what must be deleted on deprovisioning. Evidence collection must be reliable, signed manifests for model updates, tamper-evident logs of access and actions, and chain-of-custody records for artifacts collected during incidents. Consent management at capture points is crucial when devices record audio, images, or personally identifying data. Surface clear user notices and honor revocation requests by erasing local buffers and stopping relevant telemetry. Prepare compliance artifacts proactively, attestation reports, retention and deletion proofs, and test results, so audits are a demonstration of practice rather than a scramble to assemble evidence after the fact. Resilience practices keep devices useful when connectivity, power, or upstream services fail, and they ensure safe behavior rather than blind operation under degraded conditions. Design robust offline modes that continue low-risk inference without exposing sensitive outputs or allowing escalations that change system state. For example, cache policies, and only queue outbound actions for centralized review when connectivity resumes. Build redundancy into device networks, peer fallback paths, local gateways with cached policies, and geo-diversified management endpoints, so single points do not become single failures. Enforce fail-safe defaults that restrict capabilities on sensor anomalies or loss of attestation, and provide graceful degradation strategies that limit functionality rather than produce unsafe behavior. Plan and rehearse failover recovery, validated backups, verified restoration processes, and documented rollback playbooks that work at scale. Regularly test these scenarios with chaos engineering exercises that simulate theft, firmware corruption, and network partitioning, so resilience is proven, not assumed. Operational best practices for Edge AI turn abstract controls into routable habits that teams execute reliably across diverse devices and contexts. Begin with encryption by default. Keys should be provisioned and bound to hardware, with model blobs and sensitive buffers encrypted at rest and in transit, so theft of a device does not yield clear text artifacts. Enforce least privilege for both device identities and user roles, scoping APIs and administrative interfaces narrowly and using just-in-time elevation for maintenance tasks. Automate update rollouts with phased canaries, health checks, and rollback plans so you can deploy security patches and model improvements without risking mass outages. Document incident playbooks for device-level compromises, how to isolate fleets, revoke keys, preserve forensics, and notify stakeholders, and rehearse them with tabletop drills. Combine these technical guardrails with procurement discipline, vendor security criteria, signed firmware, and operational policies, decommissioning checklists, physical custody logs. So secure behavior is not optional, but the default path when teams operate at the edge. Measuring edge security makes the program actionable rather than aspirational, and the right metrics focus attention on coverage, speed, and impact. Patch coverage percentage measures the fraction of devices running approved, non-vulnerable firmware and models. Track it by region, hardware family, and criticality, so remediations are prioritized where they reduce most risk. Incident response latency captures the time from detection to containment for device compromises, which correlates strongly with data exfiltration and lateral movement risk. Device compromise rates confirm tamper, malware detection, or unauthorized access, provide a direct health signal, and feed vendor decisions and insurance conversations. Compliance audit scores summarize whether devices meet sectoral requirements and evidence readiness. Correlate these with operational metrics like backup success, attestation pass rates, and forensic artifact retention. Report trends and deltas, not single snapshots, and tie metrics to concrete actions. A missing patch drives canary expansion, slow response triggers a runbook revision, and rising compromises change procurement terms. The tooling ecosystem for Edge AI secures scale by shifting tedious, risk-prone steps from humans to managed systems and policy as code. Mobile device management, MDM platforms remain foundational. They enforce configuration baselines, rotate credentials, and push signed updates. Secure IoT frameworks provide device identity, attestation protocols, and OTA mechanisms that integrate with hardware roots of trust. Prefer frameworks that expose verifiable manifests and support incremental rollbacks. Endpoint detection for edge devices must be lightweight but expressive runtime integrity checks, model hash verification, and telemetry exporters that buffer signed events for later ingestion. Edge orchestration tools automate staged deployments, health gates, and targeted revocations so you can react quickly to observed threats without manual coordination. Choose vendors that support open standards and exportable evidence formats, because audits and forensics depend on being able to reproduce device state and update provenance reliably across toolchains. Strategically, on-device AI is a lever for both capability and risk reduction when adopted with clear policy and investment alignment. Running models locally reduces latency and bandwidth costs, preserves privacy by keeping raw inputs close to the user, and enables functionality in intermittent connectivity environments critical for industrial, healthcare, and defense use cases. However, those benefits require sustained investment in lifecycle management, provisioning, secure updates, telemetry pipelines, and supply chain controls. Framing Edge AI as a strategic asset means budgeting for redundancy, specialized hardware, and long-tail maintenance rather than treating devices as throwaway endpoints. It also means aligning with regulatory goals: data residency, minimized cross-border transfer, auditable deletion. So the business case for on-device processing is both performance and compliance-driven. When leadership accepts the full operational commitment, Edge AI shifts from risky experiment to durable advantage. Implementing an Edge AI program begins with a pragmatic roadmap that moves from pilot to fleet with clear decision gates. Start small. Select a narrowly scoped pilot with high business value and limited modalities. Instrument the devices for telemetry and validate update and rollback mechanics in a controlled environment. Use that pilot to stress test supply chain assurances, signed firmware delivery, and attestation checks with both benign and adversarial scenarios. Expand with phased onboarding. Categorize devices by criticality, apply progressively stricter policies, and require certification before a device class reaches production scale. Ensure vendor contracts include security SLAs, patch windows, and evidence-sharing obligations. Finally, institutionalize operational readiness runbooks, trained on-call rotations, and budgeting for hardware refresh. So scaling does not accelerate risk, but instead compounds the stabilization practices proved in pilot stages. As you operationalize these practices, look ahead to where edge and cloud meet. Guardrails engineering. Guardrails engineering is the craft of embedding policy, safety checks, and observable invariants into the system, so that devices behave acceptably by design, rather than relying solely on response after failure. It will require synthesis provenance for model updates, runtime constraints encoded as policies, and automated reversion paths triggered by anomalous telemetry. The human side matters too. Train field technicians on tamper indicators, ensure procurement teams vet hardware, and align legal on evidence collection for incidents. When these pieces come together, Edge AI becomes an engine for privacy-preserving, low-latency innovation that plays well with governance and survives the operational realities of scale. With guardrails as the next focus, you will see how technical controls translate into predictable, auditable behavior across millions of endpoints. Metrics make Edge AI program performance visible and actionable, rather than aspirational. Begin with patch coverage percentage, the share of devices running approved firmware and model versions, and treat it as a baseline hygiene metric that maps directly to exposure reduction. A 95% target might be reasonable for critical fleets, with attention to the long tail below that threshold. Measure incident response latency end-to-end, detection at the device, escalation to the SOC, containment actions, and final remediation or replacement. Device compromise rates, confirmed tamper, malware, or unauthorized access, reveal both attacker success and detection gaps. Correlate these with geography, hardware family, and vendor to prioritize procurement and mitigation. Add attestation pass rates to ensure devices meet integrity checks, telemetry completeness to confirm forensic readiness, and resilience metrics like mean time to recover and successful rollback percentage for OTA updates. Report these measures as trends and deltas so leaders can see what improved after a patch wave, a red team, or a vendor change, rather than reacting to single snapshots. The tooling ecosystem turns policy into practice, and choosing interoperable, evidence-focused tools pays dividends during incidents and audits. Mobile device management platforms provide enrollment, policy enforcement, and remote wipe capabilities, and they should integrate with identity providers for short-lived credentials and just-in-time elevation. Secure IoT frameworks supply device identity, attestation, and signed OTA pipelines, prefer implementations that publish verifiable manifests, and support incremental diff updates to conserve bandwidth. Lightweight endpoint detection for constrained devices should focus on runtime integrity, model hash verification, and tamper indicators that produce signed telemetry for later analysis. Edge orchestration tools schedule staged rollouts, health checks, and targeted revocations, while Edge data management handles retention, redaction, and evidence export. Logging and forensic toolchains must accept compressed, signed batches from devices and reconstruct events reliably. Choose vendors and open formats that let you stitch a device's story without manual translation. The right stack automates repeatable actions, preserves proof, and turns chaotic incidents into auditable workflows. Strategically, on-device AI is a lever for business differentiation and regulatory alignment, but it requires a disciplined operational commitment to realize those benefits safely. Running inference locally reduces latency and bandwidth costs, and it provides privacy advantages because raw sensory inputs can remain on-device under user control, appealing in healthcare, industrial control, and consumer privacy-conscious markets. However, those advantages come with a life cycle obligation. Provisioned devices must be supported for the period during which they remain trusted, including security patches, model refreshes, and supply chain vigilance. Treat edge strategy as product strategy. Budget for hardware refresh cycles, reserve capacity for telemetry and forensics, and bake security SLAs into procurement. When leadership frames edge AI with operational funding and clear risk tolerances, you get both speed and defensibility, products that delight users and survive scrutiny from auditors, partners, and regulators. Operationalizing guardrails engineering at the device level embeds safety into the fabric of behavior so that devices default to safe modes rather than relying on heroic intervention. Implement policy as code patterns that express allowed model behaviors, thresholds for escalation, and step-up authentication in machine-readable forms applied at both cloud and device runtimes. Combine signed manifests for model artifacts with runtime attestation checks so the system refuses to run models that fail integrity verification. Enforce runtime constraints, bounded outputs, constrained tool calls, and hard limits on state-changing actions, so a compromised model cannot act autonomously in dangerous ways. Include provenance hooks that record and sign the chain of custody for updates and critical decisions, and provide technicians with simple, actionable indicators for tamper evidence and recovery steps. By engineering guardrails into pipelines and firmware, you make compliance and safety repeatable properties of operation instead of fragile, human-dependent exceptions. Edge deployments surface hard trade-offs that leaders must manage deliberately rather than hope will resolve themselves. Cost and device heterogeneity force choices about how much cryptography, attestation, and telemetry you can reasonably demand without pricing projects out of existence or exceeding device capabilities. User acceptance matters. Intrusive prompts or frequent forced updates degrade experience and can lead to disabled protections. Design clear user notices and minimal friction flows for maintenance. The long tail of legacy devices raises the question of when to retire hardware versus mitigating risk through network segmentation and compensating controls. Supply chain complexity increases the chance of pre-installed flaws. Insist on vendor transparency, component provenance, and third-party validation. Finally, edge contexts produce novel adversarial examples, physical stickers, acoustic jamming, or electromagnetic interference that demand cross-disciplinary testing and field exercises. Mitigate these trade-offs with prioritized pilots, phased rollouts, and a relentless focus on the highest impact risks rather than attempting perfect defenses everywhere at once. The operational discipline you build for Edge AI turns devices from unmanaged liabilities into reliable instruments that enable new capabilities while protecting users and organizations. Secure hardware routes, explicit identity and access, encrypted local storage, robust OTA, and telemetry pipelines give you the control and evidence you need to detect, compromise, contain harm, and recover quickly. Resilience practices offline safe modes, redundancy, and tested rollback ensure continuity when networks fail or attackers probe. Compliance and privacy demands are met when policies are provable, signed manifests, tamper-evident logs, and auditable deletion. These building blocks constitute a practical, phased path from pilot to fleet that balances immediate protections with long-term sustainability. As you operationalize Edge AI, the next frontier is integrating these device-level guardrails with higher-level governance so models, policies, and people act in concert across the Edge cloud continuum. Thanks for tuning in to Bare Metal Cyber, your trusted source for cybersecurity educational materials, news, and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.